Lesson 1.4 Unemployment. How do we measure unemployment in Canada? Let us begin with some definitions. Population is simply defined as the number of people living in Canada. Currently, we have around 33 million people living in Canada. And out of the population, we can further divide this into two groups. Working age population means you're 15 years of age and above. Non-working age population means you're younger than 15 years of age. Out of the 15 years of age and above working age population, which accounts for about 25 million people, we can further divide them into two groups, in the labor force and not in the labor force. People who are considered to be not in the labor force are those who do not work, but they're not actively looking for work. People would include the retired, full-time students who are not looking for work, stay-at-home parents who are looking after the children, etc. Basically, if you're old enough to work but you're not actively looking and you're not working, then you're considered to be not in the labor force. In the labor force, we can further divide this into two groups. The size of the labor force in Canada is around 18 million people. If you're in the labor force, you could be employed. That would be around 17 million people. Or you could be unemployed and you would like to work and you're actively looking for work. That would be around 1 million people. If you're employed, you could be working for a full-time job or a part-time job or both. In Canada, what is considered to be a part-time job? If you work less than 30 hours a week. Then your job is a part-time job. If you work for 30 or more hours a week, then your job is a full-time job. The average work week in Canada hovers around 35 hours per week. To clarify the concepts that we have just looked at, let us draw out a diagram, and then eventually we want to pick out the elements that will give us the unemployment measurement. We start off with population, and then we further divide this into two groups. Working age, 15 years of age and above, and below 15 years of age. And of the working age population, we said we can further divide this into in the labor force and not in the labor force. Those who have retired or are in school full-time. And in the labor force, we said we can divide this into two groups. Those who are lucky enough to be working and those who are not working but actively looking for work. Now the question is, how should we measure unemployment? Unemployment rate is defined as the number of unemployed divided by something times 100. Then that will give us the unemployment rate. Now the question is, should we divide this by the population? Or should we divide this by the working age population? Or should we divide this by the labor force? Population is not good because this would actually include people who are actually just being born or just learning to walk. They wouldn't be working anyway. Working age population is not good either because we would be including people who are not in the labor force and they have no interest in working. That will leave us with the labor force. So the unemployment rate is actually the number of people unemployed divided by the labor force, not the population, multiplied by 100. In Canada, this number tends to hover around 7 to 7.5%. if we're not in a recession or if we're not in an economic boom. So business as usual, most of the time, we tend to observe the unemployment rate in Canada to be somewhere around 7 and 7.5%. But please remember, unemployment rate is unemployed divided by the labor force, not the population. Now let's look at a few types of unemployment. First reason why there are people unemployed is because of seasonal changes. Seasonal changes would be, say, in terms of we have a winter, and very likely we would have higher unemployment in the construction sector. And in the summer, very likely the ski hills ski instructors would be unemployed. This type of changes in unemployment due to weather changes, we tend to call that seasonal unemployment. Structural changes have something to do with technological changes. For example, if you look at a few years ago, we tend to use computer diskettes, such as the floppy diskettes, 5.25 inch, 3.5 inch. But these days, we don't use this anymore. We now go for CDs, DVDs, and other types of hardware for memory. As a result, because of technological changes, chances are these people will be unemployed. And we tend to call this type of unemployment structural unemployment. The third type of unemployment is frictional unemployment. This refers to people in between jobs. For example, you hate your boss, you can't stand your coworkers, therefore you quit and try to find another job, so you're in between jobs. We tend to call this type of unemployment frictional unemployment. All of the three types of unemployment, seasonal plus structural plus frictional, altogether we tend to call them natural unemployment. Natural in the sense that regardless of how well the economy is doing, we have an economic boom, chances are the first three types of unemployment will always exist. So that means regardless of how well the economy is doing, our unemployment will never be equal to zero. This type of unemployment occurs naturally. What is actually not natural? The fourth type of unemployment, cyclical. Cyclical unemployment means if we actually have a recession, then we're going through a downward cycle in the economy, and therefore cyclical unemployment will be positive. If we're going a boom phase, the economy is doing really well, we're going through an upward cycle. Unemployment, cyclical unemployment will drop or even drop to less than zero. As a result, the economy will be actually doing quite well and unemployment will be dropping. The first three types we said, regardless of how well the economy is doing, we can't really do much to change them. The fourth type is where government and central bank can come in and try to avoid cyclical unemployment or minimize cyclical unemployment. For example, if we have a recession or we think we're going into a recession, how can the government or the central bank do something in order to avoid this cyclical unemployment? We can have increase in government expenditure. Private sector is not spending enough to create enough jobs. Maybe the public sector can actually offset some of that. Cut taxes so that firms have more incentives to start a business. They pay less in business taxes. Consumers pay less in income taxes. They go and spend more. GST being dropped, we would also go out and spend more and therefore create more jobs. Or the central bank can actually cut interest rates. So if we want to borrow money as a consumer, we now actually would pay less. Any of these or all of this would tend to decrease cyclical unemployment. And Whenever we talk about policy interventions to actually minimize economic fluctuations, this is the type of unemployment that we try to focus on, and we would actually like this to approach zero as much as possible. And this is very much for the rest of the course we want to focus on. What type of government policies and what type of central bank policies can be adopted in order to actually achieve this particular goal? Driving cyclical unemployment down to zero or even negative if possible.